I don't want to hear excuses like my scanners stopped working. It keeps doing this, because these are usual excuses. These excuses have become very old now. And the probability of the same problem occurring for, we study statistical and thermal physics, right? So we know how probabilities work. So the probability that the same problem happens for so many people is just unreal. But students keep giving the same excuses year in and year out. So plan your exam carefully. The exam will be doable in the specified time. So please don't give excuses like this in the last minute. It is a very bad habit to not plan or pace your exam, because this is only, you are probably in your third semester and you will end up writing a few exams where such latitude won't be given, and you need to inculcate this habit of planning. So let us get started with that habit right away. And the midterm and the end term will be exactly the same format. The topics will be different. So just keep this in mind. Okay. And the style of questions will be similar to the homeworks, but not exactly those in the homeworks. There could be derivations, there could be numerical problems. It won't be multiple choice, that I can guarantee. All right, fine. With that, let us get started. Any questions? Fine. So let's get started with, we finished Planck's quantum hypothesis. When will I upload the answers for homework 3? So the answers for homework 3 is an ungraded homework. In fact, if you look at the slides, most of those things are already worked out. So you are not required to submit homework 3. It is only for you to get practice. So look at the solutions that are already there in the slides and try to work it out yourself and follow the method that I described in class. So I have already worked out one very important problem in class. In fact, two important problems, one of the free particle and the other of the harmonic oscillator. And the problems that I gave you are not more complex than that. Okay, so I won't be uploading any solutions for homework 3. I will give you another homework probably a week from now, and that will be due before the exam. And the topics that we will have for the midterm will be the ones that we will cover till about October 1st. All right. So that will be old quantum theory that we are discussing now and thermal physics.
Sir, in case the next homework that you are going to give is due before the exam, can you release it earlier?
Yeah, I can try to do that. No problem.
Okay, sir.
I will look at the schedule and I will make sure that you don't have to submit the homework during your exams. I'll make sure of that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. All
Sir,
right. Yeah.
uh, sir, during a second semester, what had happened is that the professor had given the homework, uh, and it was due after the exam. Like,
That can also be
so
done.
that we could.
That can also be done. That can be done. That's not a problem. We'll work it out. No problem. I'll look at all these options. Depending on the homework, I can either give you a due date before the exams, or I can give a longer homework and give the due date after the exams. That's also fine. All right. Any questions on these administrative matters? If not, let's get started with the topic for the next few classes will be atomic spectra. Now, what is there in atomic spectra to discuss for a few classes? You will see that there are a lot of interesting things that happened in history, And the idea, the approach we will take is pretty similar to the approach that we took for Planck's hypothesis. That is, we will try to look at the problem from different angles and then estimate, or we will try to kind of follow the same approach that the inventors of quantum mechanics took. The idea is not, usually people, when they discuss photoelectric effect and Compton effect, they work with formulae. That's a pretty bad idea, at least for a program like yours, where you call yourself Bachelors of Science Research. So the idea, that the approach that we will take is to give you a flavor of how such new theories get built. When people had to give up classical mechanics and go to quantum mechanics. And now, what do we mean by give up? Did they summarily give up classical mechanics? Obviously not. And we will try to see how they approached the whole thing and how so many people worked in different directions and chipped away at small portions of the thing. And finally, when the time was right for a bright young mind like that of Heisenberg's, everything fell in place and he could come up with a comprehensive theory. And even that theory had deficiencies, which a mathematical physicist like Schrodinger could look through and sort out. Okay, so this is where this is the approach we will take. So what is the problem of atomic spectra? In the last class, I gave a 2-minute intro to this problem. So let's recap what the history is. The first big role of in this problem was that of electromagnetism. Electromagnetism, electric and magnetic fields, when they were discovered as in when people started harnessing electric and magnetic fields in labs, they applied them to various materials and started studying their properties. And one of the first things that was done was applying them E and B fields. This is the first step in history that played a huge role. And they applied them these to dilute gases. And these are called discharge tubes. Okay, so these are tubes in which they filled a dilute gas. So they had already discovered how to separate gases and generate pure gases through processes like electrolysis, which again were an application of electromagnetism. And in discharge tubes, they could create arcs due to dielectric breakdown when large electric fields are applied between two electrodes. Now, these arcs are accompanied by an emission of light. And when they looked at this light, the emission of light in discharge tubes was analyzed using objects like prisms, let us say using prisms. And when they did this, they found that this light did not have a continuous spectrum of frequencies like the ones that we are used to in the case of sunlight and other things. So this had discrete spectra. Discrete spectra as in sharp lines that were separable. Okay, so and they were usually working in wavelengths. So there were only a certain certain set of wavelengths that were seen in such a spectrum. And they also discovered that different gases had different what they called spectra. Different gases had different spectra. Okay, so these were the observations that they made. And now another very important observation that they made was that these wavelengths were not wavelengths corresponding to harmonics of some fundamental of some fundamental wavelength. And around the 1850s, oh sorry, not the around the 1880s, Balmer had actually worked out a formula that could explain the wavelengths of a particular set of lines. Now, when I say explain, what he did was he just worked out. It was a lot of mathematical jugglery where he could do some mathematical manipulation, and he worked out a formula. He worked out a formula which connected the various lines in this various wavelengths in this particular set. This is called the Balmer series, and this was the set of lines corresponding to hydrogen gas. Okay, so hydrogen was the gas that was studied, and the discrete lines that were explained by Balmer or that were connected by one single formula, the discrete lines that were explained by one single formula were that of hydrogen. Okay, so all this was happening, and in the meantime another development happened, which was that of cathode rays. 1 minute, just hold on for a second. I need to go to a different place. Hello all, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there was a lot of background noise there, and all right. So cathode rays were invented, were discovered again in such tubes, vacuum tubes, where they were subjecting matter to electric and magnetic fields. And Thomson did experiments with cathode rays and figured out that they consisted of charged particles. Okay, and this was a very important discovery because it was already known that beams of light were not to be bent by electric and magnetic fields, but cathode rays, which they initially thought were beams of light, behave differently and they could be bent by magnetic fields. And through these experiments, okay, Thomson could measure the so the E by M ratio of the particles in these cathode rays. Okay, so Thomson could measure the E by M ratio of the particles in these cathode rays. Can you see my screen?
No, sir.
Yeah, I think there is some 1 minute. Now you should be able to see it.
Yes, sir, it is visible now.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So he could measure the E by M ratio of the particles in these cathode rays. And around the same time, or even another experiment that, again, all these experiments are basically subjecting matter to electric and magnetic fields in different ways. Now, atoms, sorry, atoms were emitting and absorbing EM waves, meaning light. The discovery by Heinrich Hertz that electromagnetic waves and light are one and the same thing was already done by then, and atoms were emitting and absorbing EM waves, which means okay, which means Kenil, I think your video is on. You can turn it off. Yeah, thanks. Atoms were emitting and absorbing EM waves, which means atoms were electromagnetic entities. Okay, atoms were electromagnetic entities, which meant that they had charged particles inside them. This itself was a very big discovery because no neutral, fundamentally neutral substance can interact with electromagnetic waves. Okay, so since atoms were emitting and absorbing EM waves, it had to be that they had charged particles. But then what kind of charged particles? They were only familiar with cathode rays at that point. So a big clue to what? A big clue to the fact that electrons were inside. So electron was a name given to the cathode ray particle by Thomson, and people started thinking that electrons may be there inside the atom, but there was no conclusive evidence. Okay, the fact that electrons were inside atoms was more conclusively proven by Zeeman effect. Now, what is Zeeman effect? Of course, usually in the usual scheme of things, Zeeman effect is studied much later in quantum mechanics, where you study the quantization of angular momentum and then you study Zeeman effect. But Zeeman did a purely classical analysis, and what he said was that the atom. So the experiment of Zeeman effect is as follows. So let us take a particular line. He was measuring the the spectrum of zinc atoms. Okay, in my notes it was written wrongly as the sodium atom, but it's actually zinc atoms that Zeeman was looking at. And what he found was that in the absence of a magnetic field, the atoms were emitting one line, but in the presence of a magnetic field, the atom was emitting three lines. And this splitting was proportional to the magnetic field applied. Okay, and there was the original line, and then there were these two other lines. So Zeeman did a very simple classical analysis, and he said that sorry, since the atom is emitting, let us say the frequency of this line is nu. Okay, and you had two additional lines, nu minus delta nu and nu plus delta nu. And what he did a simple classical analysis, which is not very important for us because we will look at Zeeman effect in the more modern sense later. But what he figured out by doing this classical analysis, that this delta nu was actually given by QH by 2mc. In this is in Gaussian units, which was the more popular set of units for working with electromagnetic fields back in the day. And it is of course proportional to H, which is the applied magnetic field. So this does agree, but there is another important piece of information which comes out of this formula, which is that by C is a fundamental constant which people had already worked out, meaning people had measured the speed of light in vacuum by then. So by fitting this delta nu as a function of H, the slope of this gave the Q by M ratio of whatever particles were participating in this phenomenon. And this Q by M ratio agreed remarkably well with the E by M ratio that Thomson had measured for the cathode ray particles. And therefore, after this experiment, it became kind of accepted that there were electrons inside atoms. Now you may wonder why this was even a question, because at that point in time, it was the discovery that atoms were divisible in the sense that they constituted other particles inside was itself a huge discovery. And so this is how discoveries happen. I mean, from hindsight, it always looks like, oh, this was so simple. But for those people to come to this conclusion was a huge step. Okay. And immediately following this result, two people came up with models of the atom, Thomson and this Japanese scientist called
Excuse me, sir.
Nagaoka. Yeah.
Sir, why didn't they conclude that it could be some particle which is emitted upon subjecting the atom to magnetic and electrical fields, like something not exactly like, but something similar to radioactivity, like a beta decay or something similar happens?
Uh-huh. So the atom was itself stable, right? It was reversible. It was not a particle that was being emitted. The composition of the atoms was not
Yes, sir, but
changing. Yeah.
like, how did they infer that the particles in the cathode rays were actually coming from inside the atom? That is, they were a constituent of the atom.
Oh, that was already kind of guessed because obviously the way they did the cathode ray experiments, they kind of guessed that this may be the case, but there was no conclusive evidence. I mean, they were already conjecturing, and Zeeman effect was used. So this, when Zeeman studied this phenomenon and he did the classical analysis, he knew he could get the E by M ratio out of this, and he kind of wanted to confirm if particles were there, if electrons were there inside the atom. So the experiment was done with that purpose.
Okay, so but like I didn't understand how they figured out whether the electrons came from inside the I mean, were a constituent of the atoms or were a byproduct of some reaction, nuclear reaction or something else going on.
So I think they just went about by elimination because the material itself was not changing. The material itself was not changing, and they were already familiar with radioactivity by then, right? So this was not radioactivity was clear to them, and that was why they did not. And the materials that were radioactive were not the ones that were being used here. These were non-radioactive materials, so they did not really probe that direction so much. And the simpler explanation is that these particles are coming from inside atoms, and Zeeman effect only confirmed that that was the case.
So how
Okay,
Zeeman effect confirmed? Because Zeeman effect just calculated Q by M and said that that is the correct value that Thomson found, right?
Yeah. So what Zeeman effect did was it computed Zeeman computed Q by M ratio for these particles which were inside the atom. There was no cathode ray emission in this case, right? I mean, there was only an emission of light with different frequencies, and when by looking at the E by M ratio, and since the E by M ratio agreed very well with that of the cathode ray particles, Zeeman and others, they concluded that these must be the same particle. Now, these are conjectures. Now, later on, it could have been discovered that these were not the same particles, but it turned out to be so.
Okay.
These are conjectures, but a more another experiment other than cathode rays which showed the same E by M ratio, basically. And then two scientists, Thomson and Nagaoka, immediately came up with the once they all had more evidence that electrons were inside atoms, and since the atom was largely neutral, was neutral, absolutely neutral, not largely, they had to explain the neutrality of the atom, and there were a whole bunch of questions. Okay, so Thomson came up with this model where he considered the atom as a smeared out positive charge, and these electrons were embedded in this positive charge so that the overall atom had global neutrality. And there were, you know, and Nagaoka's model, okay, Nagaoka's model was different. He favored a sort of planetary sort of model where you had a positive core and electrons were going around this positive core like planets around the sun. So this Nagaoka model is what we currently know as Rutherford's model, but it was actually proposed by Nagaoka. Okay. So now these two models were proposed, but there were problems. So there were questions, several questions. There was nothing in these models that explained the size of atoms. All the atoms that we knew of were of the size 10 power minus 10 meters. Now, how did we know this size? From kinetic theory of gases, we already discussed this in the kinetic theory portion, where using the diffusion constant and thermal conductivity and mean free path, from diffusion constant and thermal conductivity, people could figure out the mean free path, and the mean free path was related to the radius of the atoms. So they could compute to remarkable accuracy that the radius of the atom was of the order of 10 power minus 10 meters. Now, how is that explained by these models? There was no answer. And another question was, especially with Nagaoka's model, was how are the atoms stable? For example, it was known in electromagnetic theory that a charged particle, let me put it this way, the only way to emit radiation in EM theory was by accelerating charged particles. Okay, and the rate of emission, Larmor had already computed this formula to be 2 by 3 E squared by C cubed mod A squared, where A is the acceleration of the particle. Okay. So this was already known. In fact, so this was a major problem for the Nagaoka model, or what we call the Rutherford model, because if the atoms were behaving in a sort of planetary fashion going around the nucleus, they are accelerating. They cannot be going uniformly without any acceleration. Circular motion is accelerated motion, which means they were emitting radiation, which meant that they were losing energy, which also meant the atoms would have to collapse. But this was not happening. And this was precisely the problem that Thomson had anticipated, and he favored a model which did not involve moving parts. Okay, and he also knew this question about the size of the atoms. He was not a dumb guy, right? He was a very smart fellow who was doing cutting edge experiments of those days, and he realized that there was this question of the size of the atoms. So he put in an ad hoc size factor by hand into his model so that the size of the atoms can be explained. But this was not, this size factor that he put in had no explanation as such. It was just a parameter of the model. Okay, so these were the two models, and people were doing experiments to confirm which of these was true. And the most conclusive evidence came from the experiments of Geiger and Marsden, which were done under Rutherford, and they found evidence in favor of Nagaoka. Okay, and Rutherford explained. So what was the experiment? They shot alpha particles at atoms, and they observed that a fair number of these alpha particles, a small but measurable number of these alpha particles, suffered acute backscattering. That is, they reflected from the atom, these are alpha particles, at angles which were close to 180 degrees. Now, in the Thomson model, this could only happen by repeated scatterings, and usually repeated processes when a single event is probabilistic, and probability being less than 1 always, repeated probabilities will be products of these probabilities, meaning probabilities of repeated events will be products of these probabilities, which will be much less than 1. But the probability of the backscattering that was observed in the experiment was quite high compared to this other picture, and therefore they concluded that it's actually, and Rutherford theoretically also proved that if you have a positive core, then we can explain this scattering. Okay, but then that left the size question. So once Nagaoka's model was approved, the questions that remained were the following. 1, stability of atoms. 2, size of the atoms. And 3, the enharmonicity of the emitted lines. So these were the primary questions. And if the atoms are indeed revolving around the nucleus, like what Rutherford had posited, why is the spectrum even discrete? Because if the atoms are continuously emitting radiation and losing energy, this radiation should be a continuous spectrum because they are continuously losing energy. Okay, so why is the spectrum even discrete? So these were all very difficult questions for those times, and it required an equally able mind to actually solve these problems, and that mind was Niels Bohr, who systematically went about solving almost all these problems single-handedly. So now let us look at what did Bohr do. Now before we do that, Bohr's model we will spend at least one full lecture and more. So before we do that, let us try to address one of these questions, which is the enharmonicity of the emitted lines, and see why that is a question at all. Okay, so let us now look at let's do a simple sort of let's give a primer on Fourier series. Okay, so what is Fourier series? Fourier series was discovered back in the 1700s and early 1800s, and it was already well established, and people were using it to solve various problems in classical physics. And the rate of emission of energy due to the acceleration of a charge was given to be 2 by 3 e squared by c cubed mod a squared, where a is the acceleration. Now, the accepted model of the atom was that of a positive charge and electrons revolving around it, and exactly as many electrons as to make up the positive charge for neutrality. Now, if the electrons, and we are already familiar with a planetary model, and from classical mechanics, the planetary model is due to acceleration due to gravity, and gravitational force and the Coulomb force were qualitatively basically the same. They are both for opposite charges. The Coulomb force is an attractive force and it's a 1 over r potential, and people had already solved the 1 over r potential, and there was no reason to believe that electrons were behaving any differently. But there was one problem with this picture, because no matter what, you can consider the atoms to be moving in a very complex fashion. It doesn't matter, but no matter what complex fashion they are moving in, they are moving inside the atom in a bounded space, and the 1 over r potential had periodic solutions, meaning that the electron had a fundamental period like the planets around the sun. It could be moving in elliptical motion, it can be moving in circular motion, all that doesn't matter. But there was a fundamental period, time period for this process, according to classical mechanics. Now, what is the problem with this? So according to Fourier series, any periodic function can be expressed. By the way, is everyone here familiar with Fourier series to a basic extent?
Yes, sir. We encountered it in the last semester.
Okay, excellent. So I'm not going to rigorously treat it, but I'm going to only use it for the logic. Any periodic function can be expressed as a sum of sines and cosines. Okay, with a harmonic set of frequencies. So for example, take a simple example. This is a periodicity is usually defined in time. And let us say we have a very simple sequence, which is a pulse, which it's a square pulse that repeats every few minutes. So every few seconds, the time period is given by capital T. Now what Fourier did was, this pulse can be successively approximated first by using, so if you mark, let's say this is the t equal to 0. Okay, this is t equal to 0. So you can have a wave and then its second harmonic. I'm not drawing it properly, but let us assume, and you take all this is cosine 2 pi by t. This is the second one is cosine 2 pi by t times 2 t, etc., with a certain set of coefficients. So therefore, this function is x of t. Let us say x of t can be written as a summation over all n going from n equal to 0 to infinity, some coefficients a n cosine n 2 pi by t. Okay, so now this is, let us say, this is possible for every periodic process. You can do this exercise. Now, what that means is you can do this exercise for the electron inside an atom, because that is also a periodic process, right? So the position vector of electron inside atom can also be expressed as a Fourier series. Okay, and
So
yeah,
the potential is periodic. Then should the potential can be expressed as Fourier series?
no, the potential is not periodic. The potential is spherically symmetric. What I am interested in here is that the, like the planets, right? The planets are moving around the sun and they have a definite period. To a very good approximation. In the same way, if you consider the hydrogen atom, it is pretty much a two-body problem, and the potential is 1 over r potential, which means it will allow solutions which are pretty much like the planetary solutions. Okay,
Okay, sir, yeah, understood.
so there will be a period, and any periodic process, for example, if it's a sinusoid, if it's a circular orbit, then it has one frequency, because the oscillation will be like a pure sinusoid, cosine omega t or something like that. Whereas if it's an elliptic orbit, it won't be a cosine omega t sort of function. It will be a summation of various harmonics. So whatever it is, whether it is one, whether it is one frequency or harmonics, and we know that the atom is not emitting just one frequency, it is emitting several frequencies, right? And these frequencies are not harmonic. What I am trying to show here is that this r bar of t will be some summation of some an e to the power of I 2 pi by t into t n. Okay, now you all know that I can always write a series like this in this form using the Euler's formula for the complex exponential. So this is going to be the case, and acceleration, the acceleration is dv by dt, which is d squared r by dt squared. That's the acceleration vector for this. So that is going to be summation over n an, and if you work with the complex exponentials, basically you are going to get 2 pi by t n squared e to the power of I 2 pi by n, so 2 pi by t and t. So these coefficients can now be written as summation over n bn e to the power of I 2 pi by t n t. So what we have seen is if your acceleration, if your trajectory of the particle is a periodic process which can be expressed as a Fourier series, then the acceleration will also be a similar Fourier series with a different set of coefficients but the same components.
So shouldn't there be a minus sign, like -1 for
Here you
iota?
mean,
Along
here?
with an. Sir, along with an, yeah.
Yeah. That's okay. That's fine. Let's define all this as, yeah, correct. There will be a minus sign. There will be a, let's define that coefficient as bn. Okay. So what we are seeing here is that if you have a Fourier series which has a certain set of components for the position of the particle, the acceleration will have a different set of coefficients but the same components. Same frequencies will be there, which means you can have So it is not unlikely, even in the planetary model, if you somehow explain the stability of the atom, even in the planetary model, it is not impossible to see how a discrete set of frequencies can be emitted. So why is the set of frequency discrete is something that you can in principle explain, assuming the atom is stable, which is a fact. So the atoms are stable, and if you, for some fancy reason, you say that, okay, the atoms are stable. I don't know why they are stable, because they are still losing energy. But at least I can say that if the atoms are stable and they are emitting radiation, that emitted radiation, because the electron is moving in a periodic orbit, that emitted radiation should have frequencies which are harmonics of each other. So there will be a fundamental frequency which is 2 pi by t, and then there will be 2 times 2 pi by t, 3 times 2 pi by t, etc., n times 2 pi by t, and only these frequencies exist in the Fourier series. So it cannot have random frequencies.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So, but aren't these frequencies for the same electron, like the same electron in a given orbit can only take all of these frequencies, or rather, this is just a mathematical operation. The actual thing is actually a superposition of all of these.
We don't have any, we have no evidence of superposition yet. We are at a point in history where they are treating electrons as particles, which was already established, and they are moving about a positive charged nucleus, which was also established. Now the first guess was a planetary motion, and a planetary motion will result in something like this. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and the we are not doing a rigorous analysis, but the logic is pretty much this. If you have a periodic process, meaning if you have a trajectory which is a periodic trajectory, the acceleration will have the same components as the trajectory, and that will be a harmonic series, and not, it won't be an enharmonic spectrum. But what Balmer and others had already shown was that there were these various spectral lines which did not satisfy any such harmonicity. Okay, so that needs explanation. Therefore, a periodic trajectory of an electron inside an atom meant a harmonic spectrum. Since atoms did not show harmonic spectra, the notion of a periodic trajectory was invalid. Okay, so this was the first clue that the trajectories, the notion of a trajectory, which for the 1 over r potential had to be periodic for a simple two-body problem like the hydrogen atom, it had to be periodic, because the only other solutions were the hyperbolic solutions which had, which were not stable. So for all bound solutions of a single electron with a single nucleus, the only possible classical solutions were periodic. You can have an elliptic orbit or a circular orbit, but that's it. There was no other possibility. So the notion of a trajectory itself became invalid, but it took a while before it became a quantitative, people could assert this in a quantitative fashion. Okay, so this was the point where Niels Bohr made some very important discoveries. So we will pause here What I did today was to show you that a periodic trajectory of an electron inside an atom will result in a harmonic spectrum, and so this needed to be sorted out. And of course, all the other questions remained. What about the size of the atom? So all we have done so far is, why is the spectrum discrete? And the enharmonicity of the emitted lines. We did not explain anything. We kind of made initial attempts at answering these problems and we failed. Because why is the spectrum discrete can of course be explained using the analysis that I just did. If you have a harmonic set of lines, but then that contradicts the other observation that the spectrum is not harmonic. And it also contradicts the other assumption that the atom is stable, because they have to emit and lose energy, which means the atoms have to collapse with each other, collapse into each other, into the nucleus. So things were not adding up in a coherent fashion. Trying to solve just any one of these problems was posing contradictions for the others. So we will start with Bohr's model of the atom in the next class on Monday, and we will look at what Bohr did to answer various questions. Yeah.
Here it is clear that the potential is 1 by r and it has periodic solution.
Correct.
Then the spectrum should be harmonic.
Correct.
Then how that contradicts the thing, because we didn't do anything wrong here.
We didn't do anything wrong, but the observation is contradicting, right?
How the observation should contradictory, because this is mathematically proved that the potential should be this, the solution should be.
Yes, but if you see the spectral lines that were measured for hydrogen, they are not harmonic.
So does that indicate that our model is not correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
That was the problem that Bohr had, that we don't have a harmonic series in the experiment, but the simple classical picture of a planetary orbit for a two-body problem necessarily has only periodic solutions. So for the hydrogen atom, which is the simplest of the atoms, this model failed. As we just showed. All right.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So we'll pause here and we'll continue on Monday, and we'll see the approach that Bohr took. And before that, I'll give you a quick review of some basic ideas of classical mechanics in Monday's class, which will help us in understanding both Bohr and some of the work that happened later.
Thank
All
you,
right.
sir.
Yeah. I'll see you on Monday. Bye.